This is Stereoactive Presents. I am your host, Jeremiah Lee McVeigh, and welcome to the fourth installment of Useless Useful, in which we discuss topics of interest broken into two categories. Useless covers topics that have to do with pop culture, music, film, things like that. And the term useless, I'm saying in air quotes, is used lovingly. It's hearkening back to the DIY Brooklyn venue, Fort Useless, and the community around that, something that this show itself kind of grows out of, in my mind at least. Useful covers topics like relief efforts, charitable campaigns, social issues, and other things that we want to encourage you to consider supporting. And we'll also share about projects going on at Stereoactive Media. So let's go ahead and get into the episode. Useless Item 1. I'm Still Here is the new film by Brazilian director Walter Salles. If you're unsure of who Salles is or what the film is, here are a couple of things to note. Salles is a director whose filmography stretches back nearly 4 decades, and this is not the first time one of his feature films has broken through in some way to an American audience. He's probably best known for his 1998 film Central Station, as well as his 2004 adaptation of Che Guevara's memoir, The Motorcycle Diaries, which starred Gael García Bernal as Guevara. Both films received international acclaim and won or were nominated for several awards, including at the Oscars. Second, I'm Still Here has itself been nominated for 3 Oscars at the upcoming Academy Awards. Its nomination for Best International Film was not all that surprising, and after her win at the Golden Globes last month, star Fernanda Torres' nomination for Best Actress was also not all that surprising, but the film's nomination for Best Picture at the Oscars was pretty surprising. By the way, Torres is the daughter of Fernanda Montenegro, who herself was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars in Salles' Central Station 26 years ago. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if the movie would open here in Tallahassee, but it did, and I was glad to not have to wait on it hitting streaming services before I could see it. It stars Torres as a Brazilian family woman in 1970, 6 years into the nation's military dictatorship. She's married to a former congressman and raising 5 kids in what appears to be a near perfect life, as we see play out in a rather extended sequence that does a great job of setting up the family dynamics and making sure we know what's at stake. But it's clear from the very beginning that no matter how great their shared life may be, the world around them is becoming more overtly hostile, and eventually Torres's character, Eunice, as well as her husband and one of their eldest daughters, are taken by members of the army for questioning about potential ties to left-leaning revolutionaries. I'll refrain from explaining the plot or premise more than that, but ultimately, for those of us living through the current Trump-Musk political takeover of the United States, the film serves as an unfortunately apt reminder that just because your life may be idyllic, that doesn't mean the destructive gears of an authoritarian regime aren't just waiting to start grinding in your direction too. And no matter how aware you may be of their general state of kind of looming around the edges of life, once they take an interest in you, those authoritarian gears, they come on quick and they can change everything forever. So definitely go see this movie. And if you can't see it where you're at, I guess I am hoping that it will be on streaming soon for those of you who can't see it in theaters. Useless Item 2. I first became a fan of comic book writer Tom King's work after reading his 12-issue Mr. Miracle limited series sometime during the pandemic. And yeah, this is going to be nerdy, so stick with me. At this point, I've reread the Mr. Miracle series at least twice, and I've also read his run on Omega Men and a lot of his work on Batman. But what I'm recommending now is his 8-issue miniseries, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which I recently got around to reading and really enjoyed a lot. It's a mix of sci-fi and fantasy and does a great job of really planting the character on her own 2 feet separate from Superman, and the structure of it, all told in flashback by an old woman from another planet who traveled with Supergirl, across the galaxy when she was young. It does a great job of layering in a narrative distance, kind of, that makes it all seem like the story of a legendary hero. As good as the story was, though, I have to admit the thing that put the experience of reading it over the top had nothing to do with anything on the page, but instead it had to do with sharing it with my 3-year-old daughter, who I read much of it to. It's the first time I've read a comic book story to her, and I had no idea if she'd enjoy it or not. But she listened, looked at the pictures, and has started pretending to be Supergirl as of today, calling our dog Crypto, like the dog in the story, and the famous super dog, and pretending she has a flying horse named Comet, which is the name of Supergirl's flying horse, both in that comic and the old ones. And she even asked me if Supergirl has a pet bear because she wanted to name my in law's dog, who we jokingly refer to as Slow Bear, after it. And so I told her that she has a bear called Argo. And yeah, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, is also what the new regime at the DC film studio is adapting. It's one of their upcoming projects. So having now read this, I think it's a great choice. I think this definitely can make for a great movie. And so I look forward to seeing that as well. And it's directed by Craig Gillespie, who some of his work is better than others, but like he did I, Tonya, which got Margot Robbie nominated for an Oscar some years back. He's done good work. And I think he could be well suited to a comic book story like this that has a little bit more to it than some others do. And now to our useful item. If you've been paying attention to anything happening in the United States in recent years, you very well may be frustrated with so many things, really. But one thing that's really been stressing me out even more lately than it already was is how not up to the task the mainstream corporate owned media seems to be to really holding those in power to account or maintaining a real objectivity based on facts rather than corporate or other interests. And when I say this, I don't mean that all reporters working for the New York Times, Washington Post, or any other institution of record are doing bad work. Lots are doing great work, probably most even. But if, say, your newspaper is owned by one of the richest people on the planet and he decides he wants the coverage there to go a certain way or avoid certain things, well, that's a problem. One thing I've found some solace in recently is the fact that there are truly independent journalists out there doing the work on their own of building a beat and developing sources so that we can really find out in some cases what's going on without it being filtered through either the real or perceived lens of an owner or publisher. In fact, in the early days of this still very new disaster of a second Trump administration, one of the most dramatic stories, and one we're still seeing play out in some fashion, was broken by an independent journalist named Marisa Kabas. You should definitely follow her on Blue Sky because that's where she broke the news that the Trump White House, via the Office of Management and Budget, had sent out a memo seemingly pausing all funding of agency grants, loans, and other financial assistance processed through the executive branch. Like, this was a big deal. It still is a big deal. And you should also subscribe to her newsletter called The Handbasket, where she publishes her work. You can subscribe for free, but for those who can afford it, I really do suggest becoming a paid member for only $8 a month to help support the work she's doing. Marissa and independent journalists like her are an asset that we're all relying on right now, whether we know it or not. So please support her and people like her however you can. And I'll link to Marisa's Blue Sky accounts in the Handbasket newsletter in the show notes for this episode, definitely. Please go check those out. And we've got a few things to let you know about in Stereoactive world. First, we recently released an episode of Stereoactive Presents, this very podcast, featuring my conversation with author Mike Miley about the work of David Lynch. Mike is the author of David Lynch's American Dreamscape, Music, Literature, Cinema, which was just released by Bloomsbury Academic. We also included voices from a few other friends of the show who contributed emails or audio clips talking about what Lynch means to them. It was a really, I will say, gratifying episode to do as someone who was very touched by Lynch's work and affected by his death. I really found some solace in working on that episode, and I hope anyone who listens to it gets that from it, and it can be kind of a nice thing for you in this time of still mourning this great artist who's left us. And second, the relaunch of the When We See Each Other podcast continues. Of course, this is a podcast where host Nikisha McLeod speaks with mainly BIPOC or LGBTQIA plus artists, musicians, or otherwise. And not only does the latest episode feature a great conversation between Nikki and Filipino-Canadian hip-hop and R&B artist Kim Mortal, but we also recently released the first episode of When We See Each Other's book club, featuring a conversation about Akwaeke Emizi's YA novel, Pet. So go and listen to that as well. And we are also back with a brand new season of Kind of a Lot with Matt Ruby. The first episode of 2025 is called The One Thing Everyone on Social Media Agrees On, Hating the New York Times, which kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier in this episode. But that episode of that podcast features Matt's thoughts on why he thinks we need to better appreciate the good journalism still done by the Times, as well as his thoughts on the state of journalism more generally. So go check that out. And of course, all of these things will be linked in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents. The music in this episode is composed by Hansdale Sue and Maya McDonald. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVeigh. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps to expand our audience, and it is much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps, and again, it is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com. Links for everything talked about in this episode will be in the show notes for this episode, so please go check those out. This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.